Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Marcel. I am the manager for challenges in Uganda, and I will be taking you through the first bit, which is aspects of risk. Yeah, so I am going to be taking you through aspects of risk. So during this session, we're going to look at what is risk, risk and responsibility, the different types of risks, and the risk management process. So we'll first start with the consequences of failing to manage risk. And I guess a lot of you are here today because COVID has been such an immediate onset on everyone's lives, both professionally and personally. And for organizations, is trying to figure out how to correctly analyze the situation and some of the risks that might occur in some of the contexts that you work in, and how you might be able to go through that risk management process to be able to deal with some of the risks that have unfortunately occurred through this period. Different organizations have different attitudes towards risks, and there is no one size fits all, and it depends on the risk. Some risks might be positive. A lot of people, some businessmen, for example, might pride themselves on being risk takers. Some people have a more a balanced view, looking at both the negatives and the positives. And then there are those who are sometimes negative towards risk, or might say they're a bit more risk averse. So yeah, just highlighting what I said. The risks have different characteristics. There might be different sizes. Obviously, COVID is huge, a pandemic that is across the whole globe. The outcomes are definitely uncertain. We don't know how long lockdown periods are going to last, how that might affect beneficiaries of the projects that we engage in. It's a fundamental part of life, risk, and sometimes we just can't afford that, avoid it, and people's attitude is definitely going to be different to the risks that might occur. So why do we take risks? And one thing that has been coming out is people are now taking risks to try and help people. So there are funds that are being set up. Organizations are setting up different funds because they know there's a loss of livelihood. People have to work from home. So funds are one example of organizations actively trying to take risks to try and support their different stakeholders. But as an organization, it is always prudent to take the right steps. So there is identification of the risks, then estimating that risk, evaluating that risk, but all that is against the background of the planning process, what resources as an organization you have in place, what are the risks that you can control, what are those that you can't, and then monitoring the situation as it goes on. So risks have different categories. So there could be strategic risks, operational risk, financial risk, and hazard risk. Just giving an example from operational risk, supply chain. We in Uganda were doing a project for a UK-based organization who wanted to introduce a new solar media player into the market. And one of the things we had not foreseen was the extent to how much the supply chain was going to be affected. The media players had to be sourced from China, and currently the products are stuck at customs in Uganda, but we're not able, because of restrictions on travel, we're not able to actually go and clear and receive that product. And that has obviously had an effect. Financial risk as well for organizations and NGOs who depend on funding. That is obviously a worrying time. Funders and donors might change their priorities because of what has happened. In Uganda, There was an article which stated about 85% of NGOs who rely on external funding are going to face difficulties during this time. And then with hazard risk, with the way coronavirus spreads, definitely these are risks that organizations have had to look at. How do you keep your workers safe? How do you ensure that there is adequate social distancing? So these are some of the hazard risks that organizations definitely have to bear in mind. And there are different approaches towards risk. There are some risks that you can ignore, and there are ones that you can accept, contain. You can establish a contingency, or you can transfer. So with the example I gave with the solar media player, this was something that we've had to just accept. This is the reality of the situation that we're in right now. We just had to accept, communicate with the organization, and we understand that there are going to be delays to project timelines, but that's unfortunately just what the reality is. Transfer, there was actually an interesting example from Transfer yesterday. So the president of Uganda eased some of the restrictions and said that factories are allowed to be open now. But one of the things he did as well was say that insurance companies are now going to be essential workers, because he understands that there might be some risks that the companies might foresee and might be worried about. So they might be able to transfer that risk to insurance companies. With risk and responsibility, so in an organization, the responsibility essentially lies with the trustees, who are or the board, and the trustees are held more accountable. But with any organization, it is up to the organization to define what broadly responsibility is beyond the letter of the law. So that starts at the top, and the more strategic aspects being with the board members, and that cascades down all the way down to the employees, who are sometimes the ones, let's say, on the front line. So they have to know how the organization treats risk, how the organization sees risk, but also how they can protect themselves in all situations, but also protect stakeholders that they engage with. So I just quickly, yeah, as I said, overall framework lies with trustees or the board of directors. The follow-on slides go into it in a bit more detail, and we are happy to have follow-on conversations with anyone who wants to discuss the specifics of any of the slides. So with organizational risks, there are different types of organizational risks. So, and some of these are interlinked. So you have compliance risks. There are laws, regulations that managers, employees within the organization have to be aware of, and have to make sure that they are being compliant with the law. And with financial risk, funding, for example, could affect the cash flows of an organization, which also would lead to human resource. Are your staff going to leave, for example? Do you have to consider who you keep on during this period? So there are some uncertainties around that, and those can be some of the financial risk. And if there are poor accounting procedures or lack of reporting, then that is definitely going to increase the risk that the organization has. I've touched on human resource risk. There was an interesting one on health and safety a couple of weeks ago. We had a national blackout in Uganda, and that had been caused by a floating island of vegetation, which had gone into the machinery at the hydro plant. And it seemed that the government didn't really have a contingency plan. And for about 3 to 4 hours, there was no power in the country. So that's an interesting one on an environmental aspect. And then product and service risk. ensuring that you're delivering the right products and services to beneficiaries. If you field visits, for example, are something that would be affected because of lack of movement. But then what are some of the risks associated with that? Disengagement for your beneficiaries, not able to finish the project by a certain timeline. Are there other ways that an organization can think about mitigating that risks, for example? Or are there funds, as I mentioned earlier, there are funds, people are now even taking risks to try and support and to help organizations be able to deliver the product and services that are so needed by some of their stakeholders. And supply chain risk, the good example I gave about our products being stuck at customers right now. So this risk management framework, and just the iOS definition at the top, it says the systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the activities of communicating, consulting, establishing the context, and identifying, analyzing, evaluating, treating, monitoring, and reviewing risk. So this process and this framework should help any organization understand how to effectively go through the risk management process. So communicating and consultations with key stakeholders, both externally and internally. And as I said earlier, there's no one size fits all approach. So it has to start with the context. What are the government regulations on COVID? An organization has to follow. Then it's identifying those risks that might affect your organization, analyzing those risks, evaluating and applying the right treatment. But under this should always be underpinned. It is never a static process. We don't know, for example, how long COVID is going to last for. It is very hard for anyone to foresee what's going to happen in 2 months, 3 months, even 6 months time. So constantly monitoring and reviewing and amending your risk management process to fit the situation as it happens is very crucial.